Some things happen without explanation. Some experiences haunt people for a lifetime. This is where I tell those mysteries. And remember, not everything can be explained. Story: a 911 call where nothing made sense. Things were fucked from the beginning. A woman named Carol dials 911 and claims that somebody's inside her house. We go investigate, searching the place inch by inch, but find nothing. Usually, this could be easily explained away. The mind of an older person living alone eventually starts deteriorating. The onset of dementia and other mental issues start to take a toll on their lives. Quite sad, really. However, this woman is only 24. In other words, the probability of this all being inside her head is extremely unlikely. She also seemed to be terribly distraught by this whole situation. Why would she be acting? We leave her place and tell her to contact us if she sees anything again. I mean, we couldn't really do anything at that point. We were somewhat surprised when we got another call from her the very next day. We drive down there and search the house again. We find nothing again. Problem is, the house seems different this time. Almost as if there were some subtle detail that made it a separate place from the one we were in yesterday. My partner, Beck, says that he noticed it as well, but doesn't quite understand what's wrong. We decide not to say anything about this as we tell Carol that we came up with nothing. However, she tells us to stay. I recorded him, she says. She takes out her phone and tells us to watch the video that she's pulled up. It was footage of her in the house. She's running around, breathing frantic, and then we see him. A large figure, covered head to toe in what appears to be a black bodysuit. He lumbers towards the camera as Carol screams and ducks into a room, locking it from the inside. There's a few bangs on the door before we can hear footsteps walking away. We don't know how to react to this footage, but we try anyways. We come to the conclusion that the man must have left once Carol got behind the door. However, the front door was locked when we came, and Carol told us that she hadn't left the room. Did he also have the keys to her house? That would explain a lot, but it also made this situation a lot worse. We decide to keep an eye on her house for the night. We're discreet, parking about a block down the road in an unmarked car. We're both fully awake, ready to go as soon as we see some sketchy shit. At around 2 a.m., we see somebody walking across the road towards her house. However, it isn't the man, it's Carol herself. Beck and I must have had the same look on our faces. What the fuck? We get out of the car and make our way over there, knocking hard on the front door. However, nobody answers. We can see lights flicking on and off intermittently, but we're not sure what that's supposed to mean. Was she trying to tell us to leave? We get a call from dispatch a few moments later. They're telling us that Carol has called 911 again, saying that there are now multiple people in her house. They ask if we need backup. We say yes. Without another moment of hesitation, we force the door open and barge in. The living room lights still flicker on and off, but we see the light switch and nobody is touching it. We call out for Carol, but nobody responds. In fact, the place is dead quiet. I can see the neighboring houses starting to turn on their lights from the commotion. We rush up the stairs and start sweeping each room, but there's nothing. Once again, we search the place inch by inch, but nothing is in here, not even Carol, who we clearly saw enter a few moments earlier. As I pace around in petrified confusion, Beck speaks up. There's rooms here that shouldn't be. What the hell are you talking about? I ask in response. I've been counting, he says. There were 9 total the last time we came. There are 10 now. You didn't notice it? I force myself to think hard. Subconsciously, I knew that something was off, but couldn't pinpoint exactly what. However, I eventually realize. The basement. There was only door down there last time. Beck nods. 2 now. I don't know what to think. I look at my surroundings and try to make an assessment, but there's really none that can be made. We hear a knock on the door, about 10 seconds later. It sounds agitated. We look out the living room windows, but aren't met with the red and blue police lights. We're hesitant to answer, of course. I decide to take a step forwards, but Beck pulls me back. He looks at me and shakes his head, whispering, "We left the door open, remember?" He was right. My radio starts crackling, Another call from dispatch. They're telling us that we need to leave the house immediately. That Carol called again, saying we were going to die, in a deathly monotone voice. The knocking has stopped, but we can hear footsteps in the basement. Something is in here with us. We've decided that this was enough. We needed to get the fuck out of here. As we start descending the steps, we hear a voice coming from the kitchen. Carol comes out, blocking our path to the door. She looks detached, with blank, beady eyes staring right at us. "Did you find him?" she asks, without any semblance of emotion in her voice. "I think he might be in the basement. Why don't you go check?" Beck and I are frozen in shock. She just keeps looking at us, gesturing towards the basement door every now and then. The footsteps down there sound like they're running in circles now. We ignore her request, abruptly brushing past her and bolting out of the front door. The backup still isn't here, so we decide to just get into our car. However, we see somebody down the street peering through our driver's side window. He's large, dressed in what appears to be a black full-body suit. He looks away from the window and directly at us. It's hard to tell from this far, but the suit doesn't seem to have any eye holes. Beck speaks up. "Sir, please step back from the vehicle." His voice cracks in the middle of the sentence. He's terrified. As soon as Beck stops talking, the figure starts running towards us. It's fast, too fast. In the time that it takes for us to pull up our guns, we've realized that it's actually moved past us, into the house. We waste no more time, running into the car, locking the doors, and waiting until backup arrives. When it finally does, we're extensively questioned, while what appears to be a SWAT team searches the house. However, it isn't the police chief asking us. Instead, it's some guy in a suit that we've never seen before. He asks us things like, how many doors were there in the house? And what did Carol look like exactly? And did we ever see a man with one eye wandering around? We answer inconclusively to pretty much all of them. We have no idea what the hell's going on. At one point, we see SWAT members carrying multiple stretchers outside and loading them into their truck. Not an ambulance, mind you, but their own truck. Eventually, the man who was questioning us tells us to go home and to report to our station as usual. He tells us not to worry about what we've seen here. I don't know how he expects us to do that. We drive back to the station in complete silence. As we park, Beck finally lets out a sigh. "Jack is fucking crazy, dude." I look at him in confusion. "What are you talking about? Who the hell is Jack?" He reciprocates an equally confused stare at me. "What the hell are you talking about? The dude who owns the house." "What? It was a lady named Carol. How'd you forget already?" We hold each other's chaotic gaze for what feels like a minute, but we say nothing further. We both silently exit the vehicle and start heading our separate ways home. We both know that something's terribly wrong with the other. I try not to think about it too much as my head hits the pillow. I manage to drift off to sleep about 3 hours later, only to be woken up immediately by the telephone. Barely coherent, I answer it. "We need you." A woman dialed 911, says that somebody's in her house. My heart sinks slightly. It sinks completely when he tells me the address. It's Carol's XP. I hang up the phone and slump into the bed. I just want this nightmare to end. Story: My dad is a chair. The title doesn't lie. My dad is a chair. To be specific, he's a fully upholstered bright orange angel accent living room chair. The kind with wooden legs you'd find in any three-piece suit from the 70s. He's pretty comfortable, truth be told. A little lumpy in places, but his padding is soft. Warm, too. He's always warm. There's also the telltale ba-thump, ba-thump, ba-thump coming from his back cushion. A steady rhythm at my lumbar to remind me I'm sitting in no ordinary chair. He wasn't always a chair. Until last year, he was Kevin the accountant. He was 51, slightly overweight, and generally seemed to enjoy life as a human. He was married to Mom. He still is, but, well, as you can imagine, it's a little complicated now. It was funny at first. He came home from work one day and just sat in a corner of the living room. When we'd ask him why he was sitting on the floor and not the $4,000 cream leather couch, he'd just smile and say, It feels right here. It stopped being funny the morning he didn't go to work. Turns out he hadn't slept the night before. He'd been watching a movie with Mom, but hadn't gone with her to bed. She left him sitting in his spot, unsuspicious of the, "I'm not tired, I'll be up a little later," lie. She and I both begged him to get up, but he refused to move. Phoned in sick at work, the whole deal. Just spent the day sitting on the floor in his corner. We kept asking him what was wrong, why he wouldn't get up except to use the bathroom, and he just kept saying, "No, this feels right." Mom phoned the doctor around the third day of this. He'd stopped eating or drinking, you see. Stopped getting up to use the bathroom too. Surprisingly though, there weren't as many, accidents as you'd think. Once he'd allowed the last of the food and drink to leave him, it seemed to stop coming. We also didn't hear his belly growl, despite going a day and a half without food. The doctor couldn't make sense of it. Their first guess was that it was psychosomatic, but that wouldn't explain the absence of digestive activity exposed by the stethoscope. They said they'd be back to take some blood samples in a few days after they liaised with some colleagues. Unfortunately, as I said, this was last year, 2020. We never heard back from the doctor, thanks to the virus that shall not be named. I guess guy with gut troubles who refuses to move is low on the priorities list during a global pandemic. Somehow, Mom managed to wrangle long-term sick leave with Dad's company. Decades of loyal employeeism, combined with Mom's attendance of every company, BBQ, and softball game, helped Mr. Bannerfrag by the unexplained stomach concern requiring hospitalization excuse. I'll never forget that phone call. At the time, Dad losing his job was the worst-case scenario for both of us. He'd always been the breadwinner. Neither of us could support ourselves without him. We'd lose the house in under a year. Dad didn't seem too perturbed by Mom's frantic pacing, or the lies she wormed through the phone to Mr. Bannerfrag. He just stared at the wall serenely, hovering his butt half a foot from the carpet, balancing with his legs bent and his hands flat on the ground behind him. That night I fell asleep listening to Mom yelling at Dad. He never yelled back. We started noticing the physical changes a few days later. That's when we realized this wasn't psychosomatic. Unfortunately, our shitty best insurance deal on the market doctor wasn't picking up the phone. We'd get passive-aggressive emails informing us they were waiting to hear back from colleagues, but that was it. This was not good. Especially not when the joints in Dad's arms and legs had fused. The not goodness of the doctor's silence increased 1,000-fold when we sent photos of Dad's hands and feet flaking off like discarded spider husks the following week. Did the response change? Number? We got a very snippy email about shortages on ICU wards and the critical international situation. Mom's shouting match with the chief of medicine, the one she demanded her way up the phone chain to speak to, didn't change things. We were on our own. Mom spent all her time in the living room with Dad. I'd help her wash him, try and make him eat, talk to him when she'd tire out, and fall asleep on the rug. Every day of this routine brought with it new changes in Dad's body. It started with his limbs, as you can probably guess. When his hands and feet fell off, there was no blood. They flaked apart, crusty and dry and brittle throughout. Even the bones of his toes and fingers had the density and consistency of dead skin. The wrists and ankles they left behind were smooth and hard. It was difficult to tell whether we were looking at flesh or exposed bone. The dark shining surface seemed to blend into his normal arm at the base of the stumps. This discoloration would rise further up his limbs daily, and before long I awoke to see Dad's head and torso fused to the wooden chair legs supporting my weight while I write this. Well, I use the term Dad's head and torso in the loosest possible sense. By the time his limbs were completely replaced, the rest of him had undergone a slow, harrowing transformation of its own. His shoulders, and the arms attached to them, descended lower and lower. They found their final resting place at Dad's pelvis, sat squarely behind his rigid legs. The chest area they'd left behind had its own problems. Day by day, Dad's neck retracted further inwards. It didn't stop when his jaw met collarbone, either. It pulled Dad's head deep into his rib cage. His face flattened as the skull supporting it sank, forcing his eyes to point in opposite directions. Eventually, they slid down to where his nipples once lay, resting glassy and vacant on his pecs. The change wasn't quick enough to break his jaw, though. Instead, it bent outward, its hinges spreading wide across Dad's broad chest. Each morning I'd find Mom sobbing over a fresh, unnecessary piece of himself he'd discarded. Hair, ears, nose, his thingy. All of them flaked off and crumbled to dust in her hands. He lost the ability to speak as his head withdrew. Unsurprising though, right? He made his intentions clear before he went. The last words he ever said to me. "Don't cry. I am Chair. Always was Chair. Happy as Chair." That was the worst part, I think. Knowing that, whatever the fuck was happening to Dad, he wasn't resisting it. That when he'd got that initial urge to sit in the corner and not get up, he didn't fight it. That he was happy this way. The implication being that when he was human, when he was a father and husband and accountant, he wasn't. Sadly, I still don't know why or how Dad became a chair. I didn't post any photos, you see. Mom wouldn't let me, didn't want the embarrassment, wanted to keep Dad's dignity intact. Thing is, I agreed with her, and kind of still do. I'm glad I didn't go to the socials with pics of Dad at various stages of his journey. The temptation was there to see if anyone could help. Nobody could have though, could they? Dad would have become just another internet circus freak. I've done enough research and digging over the months to know that whatever happened to Dad, he's the only one. Well, almost only. Mom's own changes started around the time Dad's skin was rethreading into orange fabric, and his eyes had hardened into plastic buttons. Her change was a little different. It started in her torso, stretching her day by day while she remained in crab pose. I must say, she makes a great couch. Her transformation may have been a little more distressing, but the end result is better. Sorry, Dad, it is what it is. I think the worst part with Mom was the despondency. Dad was so serene as he changed. Mom, though? Mom wouldn't stop weeping. Quiet sobs, tears that fell for a few days, even after her own eyes had become flat plastic. She wasn't crying because of the change, though, I think. I think it was because she wouldn't get to see how beautiful I'll look when I go through my own metamorphosis. Thing is, I get it now. Dad was right. He was chair. Mum was couch. I am coffee table. I always was. I was scared at first when I realized. The truth hit me like a piano drop from the Empire State Building. I was scrubbing the last of Mom's remaining human skin when it struck through every bone in my wrong body, just as it must have done both Dad and Mom. I spent that whole night sitting on Dad, tears falling down my cheeks, staring at my spot. I didn't want it to be true. I screamed for it, not to be, more than once. I couldn't deny the facts I knew deep down to my bones, though. That spot, the space on the rug in front of chair, Dad, and couch Mom, is for me. It's mine, where I belong. Unlike blissfully accepting Dad and weeping resigning Mom, I fought it for a few days. I'm not like them. I'm only 17. I have had dreams, ambitions, goals. I wanted to go to college, settle down, marry some lucky guy, be a mom. I wasn't ready to give up my human form. I spent my nights begging for more time. Nothing answered. The urges didn't abate. My awareness of reality now, the illusions had been swept away, was too great. When I have slept this last week or so, my dreams have always been the same. I dreamt of true reality, of how I now know things should be. I dream of me in my place, my body elongated and wooden and flat, as is right, as is correct, as is natural. I have long, blissful slumbers filled with the feeling of hot ceramic mugs on my tabletop and thick carpet beneath my 4 legs. I can't fight it anymore. I'm posting this here, but also printing it out to leave as a note for the removal guys. I want them to be careful with us when the bank repossesses the house and we end up in storage. Please keep us together, if you can. We're a set. Dad's sick leave ended months ago. As you can imagine, the foreclosure notices have been piling up. I stopped caring about the pile of mail under the door around the time that Mom's ribcage split and flattened into her wide pinstripe velvet upholstered back. I haven't been hungry in days, or thirsty. I'm not even sure if I'm breathing now. I think about it. I'm still scared, but I've come to accept that this is the way things have to be. I don't know why, they just do. Maybe it's a curse. Maybe this house is buried on some ancient ritual site. Maybe it's just some freak anomaly of physics. Who knows? Whatever the reason, I have to suck it up and accept the way things are. This body, This walking, wobbling mass of skin and bone, and ghibli bits that I love so much, isn't right. It isn't mine. I'm not meant for it anymore. Once I post this and print the copy for the removal guys I'm going to get in my spot, then it's just a case of closing my eyes and waiting. I can already feel my limbs pulling inward, my thighs and upper arms sliding to where they'll meet at my navel in a few days. There's a tugging on the back of my knees where they'll bend in on themselves, and all 20 of my fingers and toes grow number with each hour that passes. Do I have any regrets? Thousands. There's so much I'll never get to do, to see, to go, to be. I can't hide from the truth though, not anymore. I am coffee table. Story. Has anyone heard of this city? No one seems to remember it, and something horrific might have happened to it. Apparently, there was once a city in the north of Sweden called Corona, but somehow we've all forgotten about it. I'm a police officer working in Kalix, a municipality close to where the lost city of Corona is supposed to have been. At that place, there are no signs of the city, only a dense forest. But certain details related to my own family makes me certain this place was indeed real. The entire world just forgot about it. I can't imagine how or why, but it's the only conclusion I've been able to reach. For me, this all started when 2 Romanian blueberry pickers came into my small office to report something they had found deep in the dense forest. They didn't know enough Swedish or English to explain exactly what it was that they had found, but it was immediately clear to me that it had terrified them completely. From what I understood, it seemed to involve a human corpse. Eventually, after having brought in an interpreter from the town next to mine, it was revealed that they had stumbled upon a dead child, no more than 10 years old. They led me and 2 of my colleagues, followed by an ambulance, to the location where they had found the child. The sun was setting behind a thick mist when we got there. I lit a cigarette while we left the main road and walked into the forest, to where the child was supposed to be. I felt a bit uncomfortable having to deal with a dead child, but I had handled cases like this before, some car accidents, and didn't feel too affected by it now. It was just another job, or so I thought. The Romanians stopped when we got close and refused to go any further. There was panic in their eyes, more than I expected, even given these extreme circumstances. One of my colleagues stayed with them, while the rest of us continued. We soon came upon a huge boulder that had been placed there by the ice sheet that covered Europe during the Ice Age. My colleague walked around it, and a few moments later, he came running back, pale as if he had seen the devil himself. He bent down and puked right in front of me. He said, "It's on the other side. Holy shit." I didn't ask him any questions. I only proceeded to check it out for myself with the medics following behind me. What we found on the other side of the boulder, it wasn't natural. Half the child, a blonde little girl, was fused with the boulder just as if she had been passing through it as a ghost, and then suddenly turned into a human before she had time to exit the rock. Or, as my colleague later remarked, it was as if she had been teleported into the rock. The girl's sorrowful, dead gaze into the forest seemed to tell a story of a tragedy unknown to the living. The medics quickly shied away from her eyes in silence, horrified by the fate she must have suffered, but I couldn't look away. I've never been a religious man, but this experience made me doubt everything I'd believed before. And I don't just mean the bizarre way the poor girl had lost her life, half engulfed by the boulder. There was something else about the girl as well. Something that made me feel completely empty inside, just as if a piece of my own soul was ripped out of me, leaving an empty hole in my heart that quickly filled up with a sorrow I had never felt before. It was a dreadful feeling, only made worse by the strange fact that a small part of me recognized the girl. I couldn't tell from where. Her face was like the vague memory of a dream recently forgotten. We collected ourselves and started talking, trying to make sense of the situation without any success, while the medics approached the body. I tried to focus on the hard facts while we investigated the scene. The girl was wearing a pink jacket. In one of the pockets we found an odd-looking flower. Its colors were exotic and resembled the wings of a beetle, and a yellow library card with a text that puzzled us. The Library of Corona, it said. The girl had written her name on the card as well. When I saw it, my world started spinning. Isabella Lexelius, it said in the girl's childish handwriting. "Isn't that your last name, sir?" my colleague said. It is. I didn't know what to say or think. Well, do you know her? I don't know. No, I've never seen her before in my entire life. It must be a coincidence. That's a pretty big coincidence, sir. I didn't respond to that. There's something on the ground as well, one of the medics said. On the blood-stained moss beneath the girl, there was a notebook. It must have fallen out of her hand, the one that was hanging limply above the book. I picked it up and opened it. The pages were covered with small text, written with a different handwriting than the girl's. Sir, one of the medics said, we will have to bring some tools to cut her down. Yes, I said absently. There's one more thing, the medic said. I put the book in a plastic evidence bag. What? There's too much blood. The medic pointed at the ground. What do you mean there's too much blood? I asked. Beneath the boulder, sir, the medic explained. It's impossible for all that blood to come from a child. A moment of silence, then I said, we will have to come back here with better tools. A day later, we successfully removed the upper body of the girl and brought it back to the morgue where it was examined. We also tried to lift the boulder with the help of a crane, but it wouldn't budge. Instead, we dug a hole under it, but we didn't find any new body parts. All we could do this day was to sample as much of the blood as possible. During the examination of the body, I read the notebook. It contained the story of the city of Corona. I was convinced it was fiction. A deranged story written by the man I thought must have killed the girl, until a few weeks ago when the forensic lab called me. I still have a hard time believing it, but they told me there's no other way. They had tested the DNA of the girl and compared it to mine because of her last name. It was my idea, since I didn't want anyone to suspect anything. We didn't think it would reveal anything, but it did. The 10 or so years old girl, Isabella, was my daughter. I was sure it wasn't possible. 10 years earlier, I lived with my ex-wife, and I never cheated on her, and certainly didn't have any children with her. We stayed together for 5 more years, so I would have known if she had a baby during that time, and yet there was nothing wrong with the test. Below is a transcript of the notebook. I've typed it out here in the hopes that someone will remember the city of Corona or someone who might have lived in it. Please contact me if you have any information. This is what was inside the notebook. My name is Helena Fredrickson. 5 years ago, I was a different person. I was younger back then, not just in the ordinary sense, but in spirit too. There was joy in my life, and I had hopes and dreams. That's all gone now. I don't have that much time to write this down, but I will try and explain what happened to us, to our entire community, as well as I can. The event, as we have come to call it, occurred on the 9th of July, 2013. I was only visiting Corona over the day to take my niece, Isabella, to the grand opening of the Red Grove, the city's new amusement park. It was supposed to be the biggest one in Sweden, and Isabella had begged her parents to go to the grand opening, but neither of them had been able to due to work. So they called me and asked me to do it for them. I was their go-to person for when they needed help with Isabella, the only one they trusted. How I wish that hadn't been the case now, considering what happened. We arrived pretty early, a few hours before the opening, so that we wouldn't need to stay in line the whole day to get inside. The weather was amazing. It had rained earlier in the morning, so we had been a bit worried, but when we got to the city there wasn't a cloud in sight. Isabella couldn't stop talking about how much fun we would have, and it warmed my heart to see her so happy. It took us a bit longer than expected to get to the amusement park since one of the main streets had been closed off for a military parade. This didn't bother us that much. It rather increased the feeling of celebration in the air. To avoid the parade, we had to take a bus to the city center, the Freja Square, and from there we had to take the subway to the yellow neutral business cluster, the tallest skyscrapers in Sweden. It was possible for us to walk to the Red Grove from there. There were people everywhere. It turned out that a lot of them had taken a ferry down the river that I didn't know about. This meant we had to stand in line after all. Isabella didn't mind, but I knew she would get hungry soon, and I worried that it would ruin her mood. Luckily, there was a man selling hot dogs from a cart that he was pushing down the line. I bought a hot dog and a soda for Isabella. Her parents didn't really like when I bought her junk food, but a day like this, I thought they would understand. The man was also selling red balloons to the children. Isabella said she wanted one. I tried to tell her that she would have to carry it around all day and that there would be more balloons inside the amusement park, but she wouldn't listen. Reluctantly, I bought her a balloon as well. At this point, no one knew that their entire lives were about to change in a matter of minutes. Isabella accidentally let go of the balloon. I feared it would make her sad, but it didn't seem to bother her that much. We looked at the balloon as it rose up into the air and drifted away. Soon, it was but a red dot against the vast blue sky. Then, suddenly, it vanished. "Where did it go?" Isabella said. I couldn't explain it. It had just disappeared. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe it popped?" But something, an uneasy feeling I couldn't rationalize, made me doubt that. Then, only a few minutes later, strong winds came from every direction. It carried a smell with it that reminded me of something rotten. "Ew," Isabella said as her long white hair was blowing in the wind. "What's that smell?" I held her hand harder. "I don't know," I said. People looked around, confused, and their joyful voices became concerned. Something was happening, but no one knew what it was. Sirens echoed in the distance, seemingly coming from the business cluster. "Oh my God," a woman said and pointed towards the skyscrapers. "The top of the building is gone." It wasn't that easy to see, but she was right. The top of the tallest building was gone as if it had been cut off with a knife. Isabella was too short to see it, but she picked up that something wasn't right on everyone's faces, and she became worried herself. "I think we need to get away from here," I said, acting completely on instinct. "I don't think it's safe." Isabella teared up. "But the opening, aren't we?" "We will come back later, sweetheart," I said as I walked away from the crowd with her. One of the ferries were just about to leave. We quickly stepped aboard. A few others joined us, but most of the people stayed behind in the hopes that everything would be sorted out. Isabella cried, but she was. As the ferry slowly drove away from the riverside promenade, a commotion of some kind erupted among the crowd back on land. I couldn't see what was going on, but suddenly everyone screamed in terror and tried to run towards the water. They were clearly escaping from something, but I couldn't see what it was. All I saw was people stepping on each other while they tried to jump into the river and swim away. It was a horrible sight, and I'm glad Isabella wasn't tall enough to see over the railing. Next, the sirens from the emergency alert system began blasting its eerie sound of imminent catastrophe. Everyone asked questions no one had any answers to. Most people I heard thought we were under attack, either by terrorists or the Russians. I picked up my phone to call my sister, but there was no signal. I tried with Isabella's phone as well without any luck. I soon discovered that no one had any signal. At the sides of the river that passed through the city, people were looking out of their windows trying to get a glimpse of what was going on, but the only thing they could see that was out of the ordinary was the cut-off building in the yellow neutral business cluster. "Look," Isabella said and pointed at the sky. "I've never seen such a big bird before." An enormous bird-like creature soared high above us. It was pitch black. Although it was impossible to say for sure, it seemed to be just as confused about seeing us as we were seeing it. It circled the city center a few times and then flew away again. The sight of the giant bird, or whatever it truly was, turned our anxious confusion into terror. We still didn't know what had happened, but now we knew it didn't have anything to do with terrorists or some foreign power. This was something else. Something impossible to believe, and yet at the same time, impossible to deny. The ferry let us off a bit further down the river, close to Freya Square. People seemed to be in a state of panic, although no one knew what was wrong. Some were packing their cars to escape the city. Others were running somewhere, perhaps to their loved ones, but most people clustered around police officers, city workers or military personnel from the parade to try and get some information. But they only got the same answer over and over again, yelled at them so that it could be heard over the sirens from the emergency alert system, that nothing was known, and that they needed to return to their homes and listen to the radio for more information. How are we supposed to listen to the radio when the power is out? The voice came from an old woman. "Look around, there's no power." She was right. "Go home and close your windows and wait for the power to come back," a policeman said. "We don't know what is going on, but the safest thing to do is to follow the procedure." He was interrupted by something happening a few meters away. The first person who had tried to leave the city, a man on a loud motorcycle, had come back. I was carrying Isabella, comforting her, at the same time as I tried to hear what the man on the bike was trying to tell everyone. I pushed through to get closer to him. He walked to the center of the square and climbed up on the foot of the statue of Freya. Few people believed him, but everyone that had seen the creature in the sky had no doubt he was telling the truth, however impossible it seemed. "There's no way out," the man yelled. "The main road cuts off at the edge of the city and there's only jungle. I can't explain it. I'm sorry, but it's true. We are surrounded by a dense, thick jungle and there's no way around it." "Then it's true," a policeman whispered to himself next to me. For the love of God, it was all true. I asked him what he meant. First, he didn't want to acknowledge my question, but when he saw my confusion and tears in my niece's innocent eyes, he turned to me and said quietly, "Before we lost contact with the helicopter that was surveilling the parade, the pilot said something that simply didn't make sense. He was crashing. Something had cut off his rotor blades. And he said that it all had changed somehow. The view had changed. Before he hit the ground, he yelled that he had seen a jungle to the west and an ocean to the east. More and more reports came in, and even though it was impossible to tell rumors from facts, they were all telling the same story. The entire world around the city had been replaced in an instant. The city was the same, but the sky above it wasn't. Eventually, the screaming sirens went silent, the cars stopped beeping their horns, and the cacophony of voices died out. An uncanny silence fell over the city. The feeling was beyond unreal. I didn't know what any of this meant. I tried to explain it to my niece, but she was only 5 years old and she couldn't understand. She wanted to go home to her parents, and I didn't know what to tell her. She was tired and needed rest, so I went to a hostel nearby and paid for a room. Soon, the economy of the city would collapse, but for the first few days in this new unknown world, people still accepted money as payment. What followed was 5 years of unending trials and hardships, a continuous battle for survival with no hope for help or rescue. It started during the first night. The sun, identical to our own yet new and strange, sat due north instead of west, and was replaced by unrecognizable stars covering the entire sky. As I looked up at them from the small window in our room, I didn't feel awe, but rather I felt completely lost. The strangest feeling during all these years must have been the paradoxical sensation of familiarity on the streets, mixed with the awareness of total displacement. I think this was partly why people kept close to the city center, to drown themselves in the illusion of being home, even though they knew deep down that they couldn't escape their fate as stranded in the unknown. Then, as I leaned out the window, I heard the sounds. People screaming, gunshots, cars, driving madly through the streets without anywhere to go, and the occasional odd howling that made my blood run cold. I never saw anything of what happened that night, but it changed the population. More than 2 million people, forever. I closed the window and hid behind the bed with Isabella. She wanted to cry for her mother, but I kept my hand over her trembling mouth. The next night was calmer, probably because no one dared venture outside. During the days, I soon realized the threat didn't come from the unknown jungle outside of the city, but from the people within it. It was impossible to tell how much crimes were committed, but given what I saw with my own eyes, looting, robberies, and even murders, I figured the rate of crime must have gone up by a lot. However, it wasn't total anarchy. The police and the few military units that had been in town for the parade kept some vital order to the community. Since ordinary people didn't have guns, the police and the military wasn't threatened by the average citizen. A leader stepped forward, the man on the motorcycle, and after a few weeks, everyone seemed to cooperate peacefully. The food that was left in the stores were mostly distributed fairly, and everyone that could work seemed to do it without hesitation, even I. The scientists that had been working at the university at the time of the event couldn't figure out what had happened, but with the help of hundreds of citizens, they managed to build a small nuclear power plant that could return electricity to the city. I mostly helped out with that project. I didn't know anything about nuclear physics, but I did what little I could. It was amazing what we were capable of as a people, and in all my dreadfulness, a feeling of pride grew in my chest. Although, our time in this world wasn't simple. Far from it. Aside from my personal problem with keeping Isabella healthy and safe, which I succeeded with, although she never felt safe, there were three major problems that kept growing larger for every week. The first one was the food and water situation. Some people had managed to grow wheat and potatoes in parks and on soccer fields, but it wasn't enough. We were running out of food and water. It did rain from time to time, but very few people felt safe drinking the rainwater. To battle this problem, and to find solutions to some other problems as well, expeditions were sent out to explore the jungle. These typically ended the same way, that is, with no one coming back. Only once or twice did someone manage to return to the city, but they weren't themselves anymore. It was as if something in the jungle had captured their souls and let their bodies walk back unscratched. The second problem was nature. It seemed to have spared us the first couple of months, but soon after we got the electricity back, it turned on us. It took a while before I saw it with my own eyes, but, seemingly at random, mysterious creatures entered the city. Sometimes they just walked right through it, never to return again. A policewoman, one of the new recruits, told me that she had followed a naked blue child as it solemnly walked into the city and then back out of it again. At other times, indescribable monsters wreaked havoc on the streets, killing as many people as they could before returning to wherever they came from. At one point, and this I actually saw for myself, an enormous centipede, pure white with hundreds of red eyes, suddenly appeared from a manhole. It quickly climbed up against a building, as if it knew exactly what it was doing, and entered one of the windows on the top floor. Next came the screams from the people inside the building. A few escaped, but everyone else inside were ripped to shreds. Only after about 5 minutes did the centipede exit the building from the entrance, its white segmented body stained with blood, and return down the manhole. These attacks, as they were called, aroused fear and panic in all of us. Although it didn't happen that often, it happened often enough for everyone to be on edge all the time. The third problem also didn't become noticeable until later. It was a problem of health. There was no pattern to who was affected or not, but some people, probably no more than 1%, got sick. It started out like a fever, and slowly progressed with nightmarish mutations randomly hitting the body. Most of these mutations made the victims handicapped and disfigured, but sometimes, very rarely, the victims developed properties that were seemingly beneficial to them. The most extreme case of this that I saw was a young girl who grew a third eye in the middle of her forehead. The iris of the new eye glittered with amazing colors, and the girl claimed that she could use the eye to see other people's emotions. At the beginning of the health crisis, the sick people were treated badly, just as if they had been monsters from the jungle. This treatment only got worse when it was revealed that the creatures from outside never attacked the sick. At one point, a mob gathered at Freya Square, set on chasing the sick people out of the city. Luckily, this was stopped by the military. In the end, however, the sick people were sent into the jungle, not to be away with them though, but to make use of their immunity to the nature of this world. This turned into a huge success that eventually solved the food and water problem. They could venture out and explore the surrounding area and return with edible fruits, vegetables, and small mammal-like animals that they hunted. This was a turning point for us, and then luck struck again. All attempts at fishing had failed so far, but all of a sudden there were fish everywhere in the river. We soon learned that there were different periods for when the fish was out to sea or close to land. However, as soon as they came close to land, mysterious purple thunderstorms that lasted weeks tormented the city. And yet, we survived. Many people didn't, of course, but life was possible. In the end, we prevailed. During the 5 years that followed, there weren't that many catastrophes, and our focus on survival kept most of our thoughts of home away. Even Isabella thought less and less of her parents as she grew older. Over time, most people got used to the bizarre situation they had found themselves in back in July 2013. Many people did commit suicide, yes, but most people choose to live on in this unknown land. Two events, however, changed things. First, it was what happened to a planned expedition at sea. Hundreds of people, mostly men, decided to venture out into the ocean with one of the luxury cruisers that had been moored next to the city. This was going to be a great adventure, and, perhaps, a way to find some answers to where we had ended up. It inspired all of us. Thousands of people, Isabella and I included, had gathered to watch as the huge boat slowly sailed out. It all felt similar to that day 5 years earlier, when we had waited for the amusement park to open. We all stared at the horizon as the boat, named Birdo de Espero, turned into a small dot against the setting sun. We imagined the amazing adventures they would be on and looked forward to their return. But then something that must have been larger than anything we had seen so far came out of the water and swallowed Birdo de Espero whole. Some people screamed and others cried. This was a hard blow to the city. Just knowing that a being like that, a being able to eat an entire luxury cruiser in one bite, could exist deprived many people their hopes of a future. The next event was different. It was a miracle, to say the least. It happened only a month after the destruction of Birdo de Espero. A military guard, a young man who had only been 15 at the time of our disappearance from Earth, discovered that when he stood at a certain place at Freja Square, he could tune into a specific radio station from our old world. The station's name was Synthwave Mix, and dedicated most of its broadcasting to that kind of music. Hope returned immediately, but this time, the hope was different from the one we had spent 5 years building up within ourselves. This was the hope of seeing our loved ones again, the hope to return home. The people at the university investigated the area to try and determine where the radio signals were coming from. They didn't have much success, but soon realized that they emanated from the ground beneath Freya Square. While the area was investigated by the scientists, ordinary people showed up en masse. They all had radios of different kinds with them, like children carrying stuffed animals to feel safe, hoping to tune in to Synthwave Mix and get a taste of their lost home. Of course, the area where the radio station could be heard was too small, and the police had to chase everyone away to give the scientists the room they needed. A few days later, though, the scientists placed a set of large speakers at the foot of the statue of Freja and connected them to the receiver they were using to listen in on the radio station. Day and night, the relaxed, somewhat melancholic synthetic music played non-stop to the entire city. People congregated around the statue. They even defied the dangers of the night. This became our city's new tradition, ending the day by going to the statue and sitting down around it, as if in prayer, became our pilgrimage. It wasn't exactly the music that drew people to the square, but rather its origin. Still, the electronic melodies soon turned into a symbol of all of our hopes and desires. From time to time, people got up and danced, sometimes while crying from a bittersweet joy difficult to explain. Although, the thing that made us all go silent and become totally focused was when the host said something. Usually, they only spoke about the music they were broadcasting, completely unaware that an entire city full of people were listening to them almost religiously. But on rare occasions, they talked about the world outside. At those times, it felt like our hearts collectively stopped in anticipation. Would they say something about us, about their efforts to figure out where we all had gone and how they would bring us back? But there was never any news about us, just as if they had already forgotten about us or never known about us at all. The tragic fate of the city of Corona never came up. Yet, we never lost faith. It took a long time, and now I'm getting closer to the present day, but eventually, the scientists decided that it would be worthwhile digging a large hole right where the radio waves seemed to sip out of the ground. This was no easy task, and neither was it safe. The work took weeks. Again, we all helped. No one really knew what exactly we were looking for. We only knew that it was something. When we reached the bottom, where the rock was too hard to dig through, a mountain of dirt covered the entire square. Our efforts hadn't been in vain, we discovered. Right beneath the place where the radio waves had been picked up, there was a small hole in the bedrock. People were asked to back away from it while the scientists investigated it. First, they tried to measure how deep it was. This took some time since it was hard to find a long enough rope. In the end, it was estimated to be about 700 meters deep. Next, some equipment was sent down tied to the end of the rope, and to everyone's surprise, everything that was sent down was swallowed by the hole. Of course, no one knew where it went, but we all thought the same thing, that, somehow, it had returned home. It was a reasonable assumption given that the only thing coming out of the hole, the radio waves, came from Earth. We all rejoiced in this discovery. More experiments were done, and although some questions remained unanswered, The consensus, even among the scientists, was that the hole really was a portal back to our own world. There were two large problems that needed to be solved though. The first was the safety. Every time something tied to the rope disappeared at the bottom of the hole, the rope was cut off, just like the skyscraper 5 years earlier. This meant that it was possible that whoever entered the hole would be cut off as well. However, this problem was solved pretty soon. By tying a camera to the rope, connected to a screen above ground, it was discovered that the rope was only cut off when pulled back. As long as it wasn't pulled back, the screen still received signals from the camera. The camera never recorded anything other than darkness on what was assumed to be the other side, but since it continued to work until the rope was pulled back, this didn't seem to be such a big problem. After all, some technical issues were expected under the circumstances. The second problem was that the hole was too small for anyone to fit into. Many attempts were made to widen the hole, but the bedrock seemed to be made out of a stronger material than any of our machines could tear into. This was extremely frustrating. It made us feel like we had reached the finish line only to discover that we were unable to cross it. In the end, one of the scientists said she wanted to send her 10-year-old son down the hole. He was small enough to fit into it. This was widely debated for quite some time before it was approved. The mother argued that the city of Corona was no place for her son, and that all the evidence suggested the hole was the only way home. The boy was brave. He knew he would probably never see his poor mother again, but still went through with it. He was given a walkie-talkie, and after a tear-filled goodbye to his mother, he was sent down the 700 meters deep, pitch-black hole. He was instructed to radio in after he reached the other side, confirming he was safe. After the rope was pulled back, the mother waited and waited for her son to report. However, he never did. For weeks, the mother sat at the edge of the hole, under merciless heat and under pouring rain, calling her son over and over again with her walkie-talkie. No one knew what, if anything, had gone wrong. Since no other radio waves had been picked up other than synthwave mix, it was possible that other radio waves simply couldn't enter into our world for some reason. Still, the authority deemed the hole too unsafe for anyone else to enter. This didn't change people's minds though. The hole represented the only true hope we had felt in years. And given all the horrible things in our world that could destroy us at any moment as easily as it is for us to blow out a candle, the small risk of going through the hole seemed to be more than acceptable. The hole was guarded by the police, but most of the police shared the city's collective opinion that the hole was the only way out, not for any of the adults, but for our children. And now I'm sitting here, in the room I paid for 5 years ago, writing this down. During the last few weeks, many parents have been sending their children down the hole at night. This world is truly no place for them. Although they could survive, they deserve better. Hence, like many others, I've decided to send Isabella home. When I told her about it, she looked at me with a happiness in her eyes I hadn't seen since we were transported to this dreadful, God-forsaken world. I've been writing this all day now. It's my testimony to what happened to Corona. I will give this notebook to Isabella. I'm sure she will be able to give it to her father. Somehow, I know it in my heart that she will find her way home to her parents. Soon it will be dark, and I will bring Isabella to Freya Square one last time. I'm sorry it took so long. Helena. Story: Prison is hell. I hate it here. Granted, I deserve it. I'm currently locked down behind massive concrete walls and solid steel doors in a maximum security penitentiary. I was locked up what feels like a lifetime ago now. I earned it. I did. Every second I rot here is justice, but that doesn't change the fact that I hate it. It is cold here. I have a single concrete cot and toilet. My clothes itch and are too thin to keep any chills out. The walls are a gray with a sickly green tint due to the dull, swamp-like tile that sends a grossly colored glow into the room, reflecting the buzzing fluorescent light above me. The door is thick and unmoving. They paint it the same shade of sickly green as the floor. I assume it is lead-based to save on cost. Maybe if I lick it enough times, maybe I can kill enough brain cells to forget I'm here. I have no roommate, as many don't, who are perceived as extreme risks. Thankfully, I can still have time outside and shower without being entirely supervised. More than I can say for many in here. My only commodity is my toilet paper and my journal. I earn the journal through much work and good behavior. The pencil I write with is dull and has no eraser, like that a golfer would use to keep scorecards. I am allowed 4 hours per day with it, between breakfast and lunch. I receive the journal and pencil with my meal and return it in kind. If the pencil has any pieces missing, or there are any extensive tears in the pages, then I will lose it for the following day. So I comply. So I may have some mild comfort in this concrete cage in which I slowly die. Again, I definitely earned it, but that doesn't change the fact that prison is hell. I earned my place here because I killed people. I killed many people. I killed 20 people to be exact. This is the first time I've actually written it. I beat the cannibal's number, which for some reason gave me a sense of accomplishment. However, what gave me more satisfaction was the evenness of the number. 20. 2. 0. 20. 20. 2. 0. 2 to 0. 2.0. 20. Even and smooth. My compulsion made it this way. 21 would have made getting arrested a living hell. 15 would have been okay, but 20 was much cleaner. Increments of 5. Always increments of 5. Sometimes during a shopping trip, I would grab a stick of gum so as to have 20 or 10 or 30 items even. However, in the case of the killings, it was much more intense. The problem was the itch I felt in between. It was a gnawing pain in my mind from 1 to 4 and 6 to 9. The itch was not as bad during 5s, but 10s were the best. However, that number will eventually attract attention. That number is partially what got me caught, but I had to scratch the itch, so to speak. It made me empathize with vampires in the old horror stories, the sensation of aching thirst that cannot be quenched. It is nightmarish. The same remained true for my age, 40. I finished at 40, which made me content. I hated not having an even age. I could force down the bad feelings my age ended in 5s or even numbers, but I always had bad years with 1s, 3s, 7s, and 9s. I digress. I understand it is abnormal behavior, but it's a compulsion. I have it manageable so that most would never notice in a day-to-day routine. I have to reminisce on these pages because I have no way of going back. It started many years ago, and the urge only grew from there. The first time I killed was interesting. I should have felt the need to immediately kill again, as I did in later years, but I didn't. They say mental illness worsens with age. I guess that's what kept me from acting again so soon, but I'm not sure. The first time I killed was pretty lackluster. I was walking home from school through the woods where very few kids were bold enough to cross. While walking, I stumbled upon a man. He was clearly injured, and even at the age of 12, I knew he had little time left. He sat, holding his side, panting in labored breaths. He didn't see me yet. From my vantage point, I could see a long, white bone jutting from his leg, which tells me the pain from what his ribs were doing was worse than that of a broken leg. That, or he was just in shock. Far above this section of woods was a road, and from what I could see, a vehicle burst through railing. The wrecked vehicle, a 69 Chevy C20 truck, lay decimated some 40 feet below the roadway in the brush and rocks. I remember this truck because I wound up purchasing one many years later in a secret nostalgia for myself. Either way, the driver had pulled himself from the wreckage and crawled in agony upwards of 50 feet to the nearest tree, where his strength was slowly failing him. I remember seeing a large shard of metal, which had been ripped from the side of the truck, and picking it up. I walked slowly to the man who reached pitifully towards me for help. I slowly shoved the sharp edge of the metal into the man's throat, and watched as blood began to spurt from the wound in his mouth. He gargled like a drowning sow on his own blood, and after a time, he ceased all movement, forever. It was a rush of which I cannot explain. The excitement of ending a human life is next to none. I was content for a fleeting moment. I stared at the body for some time before taking a bloody shred of his pant leg that was hanging by a thread. I just wanted to have a keepsake. That was my first kill. I was never caught, nor even suspected. Growing up in the mountains of the South allowed much privacy, and it allowed me to get away with murder. As time grew, so did the feeling of power and accomplishment. I felt like God. No one even knew I was the way I was. I would never be a suspect because I knew to hide. I hid well because I knew how to hide. From the time I was a boy, I knew how to blend in. Sometimes it was a challenge because of my appearance, but I learned a simple skill: how to hide in plain sight. I was able to work hard in the background. I made good grades and maintained very few close friendships throughout school, so no one would discover anything about me. However, I made sure everyone had a nice thing to say about me, carrying groceries, helping kids with studying, always using manners. I graduated in the upper ranks of my class and soon attended the local college. After I earned a degree in business, I worked hard where I could and raised enough money to buy my own rig. I worked by riding the highways as a trucker for years and eventually bought 2 more rigs. By 35, I was a respectable business owner in my old town with a dispatch and a few drivers. I obviously still drove, even as the owner, because it kept me close to my only real passion. I hid well in plain sight because white people love a nigger. In a town of 90% white and 10% other, I learned to blend despite being a minority. Learn to talk like them, learn to walk like them, and you can manipulate them into whatever you want. I hate them. Not white people, all people. My mother died shortly after I graduated high school from heart failure, and I felt liberated, for I held her opinion highly. Her opinions often kept me in line and respectable. When she died, I was free to pursue my own interests. My father, while a good man in his own right, never held much weight in my actions, so I walked the path I chose for myself, despite what his feelings may be. Either way, I dwindled for some time after the first murder. The urge slowly grew. By high school, I kept my eyes peeled for another opportunity to snuff out a life. Finally, that day came. The second time I murdered was equally uninspiring. I found myself at a graduation party, and the whole senior class was drinking heavily, all except me, that is. We were at the home of a wealthier student who had maintained a spotless record through both junior high and high school, and wanted to go out in a way where she could get out of her pre-verbal box. I learned 2 things that evening. The first, that a well-mannered, well-educated young lady was no different than anyone else in regards to having a darker side. She wanted to be remembered for a party. Not her good grades, not her generous deeds, not her modest manner of dress, but a party. Everyone has a dark side in some way. This was the first thing I learned. The second was that if everyone is drunk and dancing on the roof, you could bump a certain young lady discreetly enough to send her 3 stories down into the concrete and make it look like an accident. She landed with a smack that can only be replicated in my dreams. This was the first time I was aroused by a killing. I'm not sure why. She was in a 2-piece, which I assume her parents knew nothing about, and her skin was pale and smooth. Her deep brown hair flowed past her shoulders, and the look of utter confusion and terror in the face of innocence was priceless. Blood pooled from her head and seeped into her nearby swimming pool. I fancied her, you could say, but only because she represented something that does not exist: human innocence. When her skull cracked hard against the pavement, I was instantly excited. I had to sneak away to handle it and steal a memento from the girl's room. Meanwhile, the remaining partygoers descended into madness, trying to repair a situation that was far beyond broken. The chaos I caused that night again resurfaced my deep sense of accomplishment that only comes from death. This was the second time I killed. 18 years of age. By the time I hit my stride, I stood at 6'2" at 260 pounds. I had always enjoyed lifting weights and working towards my overall health. A fat predator is a bad predator. I maintained this level of fitness for most of my adult life. I had to in order to pursue my passion. Of course, things would have a way of catching up with me. I was incarcerated with an unfortunate mountain of evidence. I wouldn't say I covered every base perfectly to ensure not getting caught, but I felt like I was careful enough. I guess not in hindsight. I remember the day I was arrested. I had turned 40 the month prior and was on the road delivering a shipment of plywood. I was behind the wheel of my rig in rural Alabama. I was taking a back road because I enjoy the scenery, and when you're the boss, you can set your own schedule. At this point, I had killed 19 people and the itch was present. I would have to rub the back of my neck when I thought about it. It needed to be scratched. I needed to take care of it. That's when I saw her. Miles from any structure or any living person was a broken down baby blue Volkswagen Beetle. The emergency lights were flashing, and a woman was looking into her engine compartment. The height of my truck allowed me to scan both her car and the area surrounding us. It was tall, uncut grass and trees, covered in utter blackness due to the overcast night. There was no one for miles and miles. We could be alone together. I pulled in behind her, with my low lights, so as not to scare her. When I stepped out of the truck, I addressed her. "Pardon me, ma'am," I said calmly. "I know how to disarm. I have worked on my speaking voice for years in order to betray their security into my hands. Are you all right?" She stepped out from behind her hood, and I saw her in better light. She was a young Hispanic woman. Her clothes were tattered, but I think that was intentional. She had silky dark hair to her shoulders and black librarian glasses. She was pretty, which was a bonus for me. Consider it like a dinner. You're going to get your meal, but when it includes dessert, then it is all the better. I also knew she could complete this cycle. She could be the 20th and I could rest. Best yet, she was petite, so there would be little fight. "I think the engine is shot," she said in a desperation that these dark woods certainly played well into. She just wanted to get out of danger. Little did she know. "I can give you a ride. I own this company so I can make the time." I didn't want to sound presumptuous, but I knew by making myself a manager it would remove the creepy truck driver mentality. "I don't know." "I promise," I edged, in my best zippa-dee-doo-dah voice. "I'll take you straight into town, and we can find you a phone. My wife would kill me if I let a young lady stay stranded in the woods." I wasn't married, but that is another way of disarming her. A spouse always makes a man less dangerous, or again, as she thought. "Okay," she said, with her fear betraying her skepticism. "Thank you. I'll get the door for you." As she walked to the passenger side, I held the door open for her. As she took her first step up, I grabbed her ankle and pulled her straight down with as much force as I could manage. Her jaw connected with the studded metal stairs full force. I know some teeth were broken by the crunch that emanated from her skull. She fell limp to the dirt as I lifted her onto my shoulder. She didn't stir long enough for me to grab a large socket wrench from my rig. I could feel the warm blood from her mouth pouring down my shoulder. I carried her into the tall grass, just out of sight. We made love then. I had made love before to some, but this was special. She was the 20th. She would complete the need. Halfway through, she began to wake and struggle. From there, I had to act. I took the socket wrench and began to hit her. She struggled to scream due to her shattered jaw. I hit her in her pretty face, over and over, and over and over. When I had finished on all fronts, I took her wallet from her jeans off beside us. Hannah, I believe her name was. I took her glasses as they fell off when her face collided with my truck and avoided the wrath of the socket wrench. They had her name engraved inside the temple. I drove, leaving the scene entirely. I had to re-enter the highway sometime later and saw lights in my mirror. I had been stopped before, once even with a body in the back, so I was not worried. The officer walked to the side and called me out. "You Williams? My last name?" he asked with an unreadable demeanor. "Yes, sir," I answered coolly, holding my ID and paperwork for the truck and delivery. He then spoke into his radio. "Yeah, we found him." "Officer, what's this ab?" I was cut short. "Sir, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Why?" I demanded. I was not about to be cuffed and restrained for no good reason. He then turned me violently to my truck and slapped cuffs around my wrists. From there, he sat me on the pavement and called for backup. When other officers arrived, one finally noticed the blood on my back. They then found the glasses. They then found the poorly wiped down socket wrench. They then received word of a brutal mutilation several towns over. They had stopped me initially because one of my drivers was caught with a brick of marijuana, and they wanted to stop all trucks from my dispatch to make sure we were legitimate. It would be funny if it weren't so infuriating. I was brought down on a technicality. My run lasted from 12 to 40. I was undetected for that entire time. I changed my MO. I killed strangers only. I was so careful. A technicality was the only thing that could have done this. My simple home was turned about until they found my treasure box, a shoebox of souvenirs and news clippings. From there, it was easy to put every single murder. Every homeless person stabbed to death in cities, every transient prostitute with their heads missing, every unsupervised child in crowded streets. I was linked to them all. Now, one may ask, why would you be so stupid as to keep mementos? To that I would say I had to. It was my passion, and the only thing that gave me meaning. I had to keep something around. They were the only memories I could have of those times. Like I first wrote, I deserve to be in prison, but I don't regret in the slightest what I've done. The trial was grueling and irritating. Since I killed across state lines, there was arguments as to where to have my trial, but it became a federal issue, which only meant more bureaucracy. My lawyer explained many of the killings would be circumstantial at best, but just as many have my now connected DNA to the scene and are going to be nearly impossible to deny, I decided to throw in the towel. The media was out for blood, the public was out for blood, and the jury was out for blood. I had my fill, so now it was time to pay the favor forward. There was no way to avoid a life sentence, so I may as well come clean and get regale the tales of my exploits to a room of terrified jurors and family members burning with hatred. Despite the difficulties of finding some evidence of murders, I was still convicted for 18 of the 20. However, I was punished for them all, regardless. The day of sentencing, I stood still and stoic before the judge. I could feel the eyes of all those present attempting to sear me, but failing. The judge looked down at me and rambled on about my cruelties and resentment for man. The entire time he droned, I stood with the thought that the death penalty was illegal in this state. It was utterly satisfying to know the uproarious crowds calling for my head when the law wouldn't allow it. I snapped out of it when he got to the sentence. Seeing as how the death penalty is illegal in this state, I can only do the most with that in light. I hereby sentence you to 1,001 life sentences. He was being melodramatic. Not in history had there been such an absurd sentence. What's worse, the number was uneven, meaning the rest of my life I would have to say 1,001 when discussing my sentence. He knew this. My demeanor slightly shaken, I asked the judge, why 1,001? The courtroom was silent. The families, friends, and jury looked at me with contempt, but that didn't matter then, even less now. The judge leaned over his podium. He smiled with a smugness that still boils my blood, and he calmly replied, to torment you. That's how I got where I am now. I don't interact with the other inmates or the guards. I just mind my business as best I can. I don't like to think about my sentence because it makes me itch. Similar to when you haven't paid a certain bill, but don't have the funds. It's a wincing, mental discomfort. I write the rest of this in a testament to what happened yesterday, in hopes it reaches someone on the outside. My day started normally. A loud bell rang and I stood to my feet. From there, my door opened and I walked to the shower facility. I tried to find myself at the end of the line so as to get the most time out of my cell. I also like my privacy. The inmates here are insufferable. They are uneducated criminals who would have no life outside of these walls. My fellow black inmates gave me hell for being crazy, since African American serial killers are considered such an abnormality. The other races tended to stay to themselves, minus a few Aryan Brotherhood members casting the occasional slur my direction. I entered the shower as normal, but I felt an innate sense of dread that I don't know how to describe. I just felt unpleasant. I felt watched and alone at the same time. I felt completely hopeless and near despair. I quickly finished my shower and left the facility. The halls were quiet and the stationary guard was not at his post in front of my cell. I was alone in this hallway. Suddenly, I felt a large hand grip my shoulder and order me forward. The next thing I knew, I was being escorted to the warden's office. I was somewhat stunned, but complied. I walked the tight enclosed halls until I reached the last room on the right. Inside was totally dark, apart from a dim lamp illuminating a desk. The hand shoved me in and slammed the door behind me. I saw the silhouette of Warden and he beckoned me to sit. I sat across from him in uncomfortable silence. He didn't move, and neither did I. I would force him to make the first move. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke up. Let's go over your file. His voice carried. a mild southern accent sprinkled in. I did not respond. He gave no indication as to why, so I would bide my time. From here I will paraphrase what was said, as my memory can't perfectly recreate the entire conversation. Count 1. Confessed, not convicted. Man falls off cliff and you assist him in passing. You were 12, so it wasn't included in your final file, but it warrants mentioning. Count 2. Confessed, convicted. You confessed to shoving a young woman off a roof and then robbing her home of a trophy. You were 18. Count 3. Confessed, convicted. Homeless man near your college. You stabbed him and cut out a tooth. You were 20. Count 4. Confessed, not convicted. You claimed to have shot a prostitute in Texas. The souvenir you took could not link you to the crime and she had no family. You were 24. Not convicted, but you know what you did. Counts 5 through 9. Confessed, convicted on all counts. You killed 5 lot lizards before changing your MO. That was smart. They were all strangled and you kept a lock of hair. Left them on the highway. Count 10. Confessed, convicted. You took a lost 12-year-old and drowned him. You kept his retainer. You were doing well in life by this point, but murder still called, didn't it? Count 11. Confessed, convicted. Ah, this one was special, wasn't she? That gas station employee who you stalked for a while? Followed her home and broke in. Took your time and did it right. She broke your perfect streak and you were going to make her pay, right? Kept her locket as a token of your affection. Count 12. Confessed, convicted. You took a young man from a local club in Missouri, strangled him the moment the door was closed, chopped him up, and kept his teeth. Counts 13 through 17. Confessed, convicted on all counts. The hitchhiker phase. Here, it seems you just wanted to close the gap. You got sloppy. Left a lot of evidence behind. I guess because they were vagrants, it wouldn't have mattered. Count 18. Confessed, convicted. You killed a housewife in Florida. You were on vacation at them time. You spotted her and just had to do something. Waiting until her husband left and had yourself a time. Another rape and strangling. You took her blood-soaked necklace. Count 19. Confessed, convicted. You saw a jogger one morning and followed in your truck. When you knew their routine, you waited in the bushes until he passed. You killed him with a hammer and took one of his shoes. Count 20. Confessed, convicted. The one that brought you down. You couldn't resist her. You were too careless, too excited. Now you're here. You took her glasses and bashing her head in and assaulting her. He took a deep breath and his outline sat back. Do you know what they call you? He asked me incredulously. I was livid. He completely bastardized my work. I had done so much and he swept over it like an obituary column. I glared at him in the dark before answering. The scavenger hunt killer? I hated that name. They donned me the scavenger hunt killer because my murders spanned so far, and I collected odd, disconnected items. Again, my works and efforts were reduced to a joke. It still makes me sick. The warden spoke up again. Are you sorry? I sat for a moment before responding. Would it matter? He chuckled in a deep, throaty laugh. No, he said, settling in. I guess it wouldn't. He continued. I don't get it really. You're a highly intelligent, healthy, and well-spoken man. Why on earth would you throw that away? I sat in angry silence. I refused to give this man the satisfaction of an answer. Do you believe in God? The warden asked, his tone now changed. I chewed my tongue before responding. Number. Pity, he responded lackadaisically, as if my response didn't really matter. That would make what I'm about to tell you much better. I waited for him to continue. Your sentence is being commuted. I raised an eyebrow in disbelief. Really? Yes. He sat, still shadowed, but I knew he was smirking. What does that have to do with God? I know I should have had much more important questions to ask in that moment, but I was curious. I assumed he meant I should be thankful. Well, he said, his voice trailing, that would make this next part easier. You passed away this morning, son. Before I could respond, his hand tossed a few photos in front of me. It was me. I lay covered in blood on the shower floor. I had been stabbed from the looks of it. Yeah. The warden, or who I thought was the warden, spoke up. Some Aryan fellow wanted to prove his might by stabbing a serial killer to death in the shower. Didn't work though, since he was caught and will most likely be in solitary until it does irreparable damage. If that's some comfort. I stared at him. I stared at the photographs. I simply could not accept it. This is absurd. I felt insulted, and the prospect. I know it seems odd, but hear me out. He sat upright, ready to make his case. Do you know what the Universalists are? No. Well, he continued without missing a beat. Basically, it states that everyone gets into heaven, even if you aren't necessarily in their denomination. This is heaven? I was ready to laugh. This was a joke. No, see, that's the bad news. He continued. Catholics, Muslims, some Buddhists, see, they believe in a temporal plane, so they're also sort of right. See, everyone does eventually move on, but before anyone can move on, they must resolve all their earthly obligations and judgments. Before I could remark, he caught his breath and explained further. You died this morning. You served one of your 1001 life sentences. Welcome to number 2. I stood up. This isn't funny. I'm leaving. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to use my body. My eyes felt like they were being pried towards the seat. Please, I heard the warden, though his voice was now much deeper, sinking my gut. Sit. I returned to my seat with a sensation that was new to me. Fear. Now, he continued, his voice returning to normal. You are not dead. You just started another sentence. Everything will be back to normal when you leave. When I dismiss you, you will leave here and return to your bunk. Do you understand? I nodded, still stunned by what I then knew as truth. His voice. The unexplained dread I felt that morning. I walked out of the warden's office that day, feeling a hopelessness I have never known. The prison was the same, but it wasn't. It was lonelier, darker. That feels like forever ago. I learned since then. First, lifetime does not mean from the age you are incarcerated. I expected a 40-year life sentence. But after speaking with a few other inmates serving like myself, who I see sometimes sparingly, I learned that it varies somewhere from 80 to 120 years. It varies, but it is always at least 80. I guess the guards don't notice after a certain point. Also, I assume they don't register that we never seem to leave. Inexplicable, but that's what's happening. Second, each go-around changes you. The prisoners don't notice you. The others, like you, have fewer words. The guards seemed always outside of the line of sight, even when they would interact. They were like fleeting shadows. I am cracking mentally. I will walk into the showers and see someone shaving, even speak with him at length. However, when I turn a corner or close a stall door, he'll be gone when I return. Next, I learned that suicide doesn't work. I learned the same way every inmate in here like me does. I slit my wrists and they just ached for a week. I swallowed bleach and had a miserable stomachache, but no death. I hung myself where I choked and flailed, fully conscious, for 8 straight hours, until a guard found me while bringing my breakfast the following morning. I learned that being murdered decreases time, but murdering adds it, so no one on life row attempts murder here. Finally, escaping isn't an option. We have runners sometimes. Men, who just finished their first sentence. The guy just snapped. I guess he pulled maybe 60 years before dying in his sleep. He just panicked and ran. The snipers didn't even turn. He grabbed the fence and immediately fell to the ground. From there, he shook violently. He died right there of a heart attack. I saw him a week later. 3rd life sentence, half crippled. I guess we get punished if we try to leave. I don't know if it's permanent. He was a wreck upon returning. It reminded me of the cats in my neighborhood as a boy. The first time you hurt it, the animal twitches and becomes neurotic, but given enough time, it accepts its fate. The man now spends his days staring silently behind dead eyes at whatever light source is around. To some, this is limbo, where we remain trapped in the prison in which we were condemned until our body and soul have finished their sentences. To others, this is some kind of purgatory, where we are groomed for eternity in paradise. Either way, we are forced to remain, forced to live, until we pay our dues, never truly dying. I don't even know if time is the same now, but if you're reading this, I managed to successfully get these pages out. I have handful of plans, which I cannot record. I cannot risk future attempts should this fail. I'm leaving this journal for anyone who is a criminal or wants to become one. I have between 80,000 to 100,000 years left. I do not feel remorse, but I do wish I knew then what I know now. This is simply a warning. 100,000 years on a concrete slab. A hard, unforgiving surface. 100,000 years with 1 hour a day in a dying earthscape I barely recognize. 100,000 years of sickly green floors and cold steel doors that move for nothing. 100,000 years of mopping floors or scrubbing toilets. 100,000 years of being monitored by beings I cannot fully comprehend as their burning horror erupts in the back of my mind. 1,001 life sentences. 1,000 to go. Only one small thing gives me comfort. With 1,000 life sentences at least, it's a clean number. I hope I don't die too soon and ruin this nice, even lifetime, because the next one will be hell. Story. You all need to stop posting. Right now. You all need to stop posting. Right now. It probably won't take long for this to get deleted, but maybe enough people will see it to make a difference. It's the only thing I can think to do. I've discovered something terrible about no sleep, and everyone needs to know. Everyone. So you understand any of this, I need to tell you what I've been through the last few days, so you really get it. It needs to sink in. If no one believes me because they don't understand, everything's gonna fall apart real fast. Okay, first some general principles. Every emotion generates a specific electrical signature in the brain. It's so specific that a specialist can reliably determine your emotional state from evaluating live measurements. Electricity creates fields. In the case of our brain activity, the field effect generated by our emotions is so weak it's never been observed, but by the numbers, it's there. Okay, that's one knowledge nugget you need to swallow. Here's the next. Our universe, our reality, is ours alone. The reality we all share together is a comfortable agreement, though not objectively the same, and it's reasonable to assume most life in our reality is happy with that arrangement. In fact, evolution has probably built most life to be that way. Our universe, our reality isn't the only one though. There are an infinite number that sort of grow outward from our own, with decreasing levels of relative probability. What that means is that likely alternate realities are pretty close by, and unlikely ones are way further away, if probability were distance. I hope that makes sense. But the real weird part is all that is just a tendency. Some real weird probabilities are actually right next to us, because there are infinite probabilities. And the likelihood gradient I mentioned is only the tendency. It's hard to wrap your head around, I know. It gets easier with practice though. I'm telling you all this because there's a really bad reality nudged up right next to ours right now, and some of the things in it are leaking through. One of those things is our mods. It runs all the accounts. It, like us, has emotions and they generate a field. A positronic field, not electrical. Somehow their matter is inverted to ours, which is why I'm trying to get the message out. They're addicts. When we're afraid, when we read our posts and get that chill up our spines, to them it's pure ecstasy, and their joy, it feeds back to us as terror. There's no sense of shared place or time between our realities, so all fear everywhere feeds their joy, and their elation pours into our world as a general growing anxiety. People do terrible, horrible things when they're afraid. They make bad choices for the wrong reasons. They destroy things and feel justified. You've seen it. You know what I'm describing. It's been getting worse and worse over recent years too. That's because they're addicted to our fear. They know it now, and they've somehow managed to send agents to our reality to encourage our fear. That's how no sleep came to be. The mods are all under the pull of a single entity, and it encourages us at every opportunity to embrace and deploy as much discomfort as we can. Please believe me, and do the right thing. It's time to share your personal stories of hope and sour the milk for them. No more terrifying recollections. It only makes them stronger. Alright, let me tell you what happened to me. The other day, I posted about something on here, and it got a few dozen upvotes. Not the best visibility, but way more eyes than my worst. I was in a good mood. I thought by sharing terrible events that happened to me, I was making people safer. Apparently though, some readers got uncomfortable about one of the situations I described. They contacted me and told me they would report me to the mods. I didn't understand why, and I got scared. I love posting here. It's been helping me get through some tough times. A kind of therapy for the things I've seen in my life. Soon after, I got a PM from a mod. She conveyed her gratitude to me for sharing my experiences, but that one Redditor had been incredibly upset. I kept reading her PM, expecting an explanation for an incoming ban, when the next paragraph I read set off all kinds of red flags. We don't mind though, no sleep runs on fear, and if you're good at causing it, then by all means keep at it. We know what the rules say, but it's more important that people see them, and less so that they follow them. So please, keep writing, and if you need some inspiration, check out this video, link redacted. Bye. Most mods on most forums seemed irritatingly strict about following the sidebar rules, so I was pretty confused by her statement. Then, without thinking, I clicked the link. I've not included it here because you really don't need to see it. You need to know about it though. The link was to some numbered IP, which is probably something I should have checked before clicking. Oops. It was a big GIF that took almost a minute to load. When it did appear, it was high definition 1, like something from our high-quality GIFs. I thought it was bugged though, because when it loaded, it was just noise, like old-school television noise. At first, I just waited for a few seconds to see if it got past the corrupted part to something visible, but it didn't. Instead, the noise started to make sense, visually. Like one of those stereograms from the 90s. An inverted image began to form, and what I saw was nearly indescribable. Everything in the GIF I watched was backwards. I'm not saying that the video was flipped or upside down. I mean the stuff in the actual imagery was backwards, inverted, inside out, the opposite of what it was supposed to be. I don't remember all of it. I barely remember any of it. Grass grew downwards and had a strange, unknowable color. Birds didn't fly. They were glistening sacks of meat and bone, with bodies filled with feathers, and they dug warrens in the air. It makes no sense, I know. The sun in their sky was a black void that radiated darkness. Even my description falls short of the mark. Everything was they absolutely wrong, and it was this wrongness that broke me. I had a horrible panic attack that lasted most of the day, and it got so bad I had to take time off work. It's only now, after a week of trying to calm down, that I'm able to even write about it. I wanted to forget it, but today I got another PM from a mod that said, "Delicious. Click this next. Link redacted." I closed the browser immediately. I don't know much about computers, so I asked my brother about the IP, and if it could tell me anything about who posted the GIF. No, I didn't send him the link. He said it sure was, but that the likelihood of a file being hosted on a computer in someone's house was remote, and that it was way more likely to be on a box at a hosting facility somewhere. He looked up the IP anyway, and immediately got interested. It was coming from an old particle accelerator facility buried a few hundred miles east of the Cheyenne Mountains. The company that owned it closed it down almost a decade ago due to bankruptcy. My brother is kind of a science buff and just knows shit like this. He pulled some records from some lookup site and found out that an LLC had bought the land just afterwards, then had done nothing with it. No construction, no sales. On the business registration document, there was a phone number. He gave it to me and asked me to let him know what I found. I called the number, but got no answer. Almost instantly, another PM appeared in my inbox from a different mod. Never call this number again. At this point, I'm aware something really gnarly is happening. I call my brother back, and we start talking about things. I finally show him the video, and he only watches a few moments of it before switching it off. He says he's seen something like it before. Then he links me to some fringe science websites, and I give him a hard time, because usually that stuff is just for wackos. But this time, one of the articles describes everything I wrote above. There's a link to a video the author generated using some kind of algorithm or something. Some math equation for complete inversion. He took a video of a treasured family vacation and ran it through the filter. Apparently, the output was so unsettling, it ruined his life. He couldn't be with his family anymore, or do his work, or focus on anything but memories of the filtered video. A few years later, the poor guy apparently killed himself because he couldn't deal with what he saw, which makes me real nervous when my brother tells me. Then the whole science blog site goes down, and another PM appears in my inbox. This time from a different mod. What did we tell you? Ever since then, my phone has been getting texts non-stop with video links, my email is blowing up, and I can't even glance at my inbox anymore. I feel like it's only a matter of time until I accidentally see one of these videos again, and it sends me over the edge. Before that happens, I wanted to let you all know about this threat. That it's here, it's real, and it could be in your inbox right now. Sorry for any typos, I'm in a hurry. I'm headed out to a family cabin to try and isolate myself until this blows over. Be careful, and if you do decide to post, write about joy and happiness instead. Give them something to cry about. Good luck, stay safe. Hey everyone, sorry. I just wanted to apologize for this post. I'll leave it up as a reminder to us all not to let anxiety rule our lives and dictate our actions. I was totally off my shit. Sorry about that. I finally got tired of my phone ringing, so I dried it off and answered it. Boy, am I glad I did. I've been happily chatting with the kind and empathetic mods over at No Sleep for the last 20 minutes. They sent me a PM and invited me to their Discord channel, and it's been a real blast. We've been sharing funny links, keeping it light, and they've showed me some things. Some wonderful things. I'm not going to share it all here. I'll wait a few days and talk about it all in a new post. The mods have really helped change my perspective on a bunch of things, and I feel refreshed and energized in a way I've never felt before. The fear that used to rule me almost feels like a secret superpower now. It's so exciting. I can't wait to show you. Story, Teresa. This is not my story. It is my daughter's. Her name was Teresa. She died 2 weeks ago, a suicide by overdose. She called me just prior to the act, informing me of her intentions and the reasons behind them. I of course pled with her, begging her through tears not to go through with what she had planned. But she was resolute in her decision, and with growing horror, I realized that this was no bluff, no desperate cry for attention or reassurance. As she hung up the phone, I knew with certainty she was already as good as dead. I knew it from the moment she had said, "Daddy, Ray is here." I immediately phoned the police, knowing that they would be able to reach her well before I could. But I also knew they would be too late. They found her in bed, by all appearances in a deep and peaceful sleep, one hand draped across her stomach, the other outstretched to the side, palm up, fingers curled as if clutching something, another hand perhaps, but the other side of the bed, Ray's side, was empty. This is also Ray's story. He died a little more than a year before Teresa did. He was shot twice, once through his right hand, which he had held out defensively, the bullet piercing both his cell phone and his palm, before lodging in the tile of the wall of the bathroom, in which he had made a final desperate attempt to hide. The second bullet found his neck, and he bled out quickly, alone on the cold floor. He was one of 9 people who died in his office building that day. 8 of those people thought it was just another Monday at work, unaware that they would not be walking out alive at the end of the day. The 9th to die, the shooter, had no intention of walking out again. Ray had called Teresa on his lunch break that day. She was at home, and the sight of his name lighting up her cell and causing it to buzz had made her smile. Married only 3 months, the pair was still in that young, fleeting honeymoon stage of marriage, and Ray would frequently find any excuse to phone his bride from work if time allowed. "Hello?" she answered, a smile in her voice. "Why did the man always get hit by a bike on his way to work?" Ray said. "I don't know," Teresa responded. "Why did he?" "Because he was stuck in a vicious cycle," Ray said. Teresa chuckled. The joke wasn't really all that funny, but Ray had always delighted in corny humor, and his joy in telling these awful jokes brought Teresa more pleasure than the punchline itself. Case in point, he had used a ridiculous pickup line to win her over in the first place. "Feel my shirt," he had said to her, a stranger in a sea of people crammed into a mixer at one of her girlfriend's apartments 2 years ago. "Do you know what it's made of? Boyfriend material." And Teresa had laughed out loud. 1, because the pickup line was genuinely funny. And 2, because Ray, tall and attractive in a goofy kind of way, was so ridiculously happy to use it on her, his smile contagious and immediately endearing. And as bad as the line had been, it had worked. They had been together ever since. "How is your day?" Teresa said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "Living the dream?" Ray responded with some sarcasm. "Actually, my presentation went well this morning. I'm supposed to present it again to senior staff on Wednesday. Things are looking promising." "That's great news," Teresa said. "It really is," Ray said, satisfaction in his voice. "You know, if this proposal goes through, we should celebrate. Go away somewhere." There was a pause on Ray's end. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," he responded. Only now he sounded slightly distracted. "Do you have some place in mind?" "I don't know," Teresa said, thinking. "Cheryl has that cabin that she said we're always welcome to use. We ought to take her up on that sometime. She and Brad will end up selling it before we ever use it. It would be nice to get away." Ray didn't respond. "Babe," Teresa said. A moment's hesitation. "Did you hear that?" Ray asked. "Hear what?" Teresa said. But before he could respond, she heard it. A loud report, a distant bang, coming over the phone. "Ray, what was that?" "I don't know," he said, and from the sound of his voice, he was walking. His voice sounded shaky. "Ray?" There was a second loud report, still distant but closer, and Teresa felt her hands go cold when she thought she heard a woman scream. "I'm going to find out what's going on," Ray said. "I'll call you back." "Ray," Teresa said, but he was gone. She set the cell phone down on the table and stared at its black screen. She got up suddenly from the kitchen table, walked to the sink, and filled a glass with water, which she downed. Staring over at the phone, she willed it to ring again, to show Ray's name. It did not. Teresa rushed over and picked it up. She called Ray's cell phone. It went to voicemail. She called his desk phone. It too went to voicemail. She called reception at his office. No answer. She slammed the phone back down on the table, hands trembling. She found it hard to catch her breath, to not imagine the worst, to convince herself that what she had heard did not mean what she thought it meant. An interminable moment later, her phone rang. She snatched it up. "Ray?" she said. "Baby," he said, whispering, his tone urgent. "There's a man with a gun." Teresa sank into the chair. "Where are you?" she asked, whispering too without realizing she was. "I'm in a bathroom down the hall from my office. Reese, he killed Mark. I saw it happen." His voice was trembling, on the verge of tears or panic. "Ray, hang up and call the police," she said. "I did," he insisted. "They're on their way." "Okay," she said. "Just be calm." She said this as much to herself as she said it to Ray. "Where is he?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "I saw him at the end of the hallway. I saw him shoot Mark. I came in here because it was the closest door. I don't know if he saw me." "Did you lock the door?" she asked. "The door doesn't lock," he said, a small sob hitching in his voice. "I'm in one of the stalls. It's locked." Teresa began to cry silently, the hopelessness of Ray's situation sinking in. "Who is he?" she asked. "I don't know. He's wearing a mask, a ski mask. I think he's—" Ray stopped talking suddenly at the sound of a loud bang, disturbingly close. Ray hesitated and took a long, shaking breath. "I love you, Reese," he whispered, his voice even quieter now, barely audible. "No," she objected, and she slid from the chair to the kitchen floor, the phone pressed tight to her ear. There was another banging sound, but this time, it wasn't the report from a gun. It was the sound of a door being kicked open and hitting a wall. Ray took a sudden, gasping breath. "Ray?" Teresa whispered. Bang. The sound of the door of a bathroom stall being kicked. "No!" Ray cried out, and the sound of his desperation made Teresa's entire body go numb. "Ray?" Teresa said louder. Bang. The sound of the stall door crashing open. "No," Ray screamed. "Ray?" Teresa yelled. Bang. The sound of a gun. And then, everything was silent in the house for several seconds as Teresa struggled to take in a breath. Finally, she screamed. The shooter was a man named Vincent Holland. He had worked in the engineering department just one floor down from Ray's office in marketing. A textbook disgruntled employee with manic depressive issues. At least, that was the story that the press was reporting. Vincent had managed to kill 8 of his co-workers, and then had turned the gun on himself at the first sound of approaching sirens. The following 24 hours were a blur for Teresa. Through a haze of shock, she had answered police questions, had identified her husband's body, his face pale but still unmistakably his own, and had made necessary phone calls to friends and family. And in the moments between, Teresa had wept, her body crushed under the weight of a grief that was nearly unbearable, the physical pain of it enough to make her welcome the thought that perhaps it might kill her. What a mercy that would be, she thought. The night of Ray's death, she had slept the deep and artificial sleep of the drugged, her body succumbing to whatever cocktail her best friend Cheryl had insisted on giving her. Teresa had not asked, did not even care what the pills were, but had taken them all and quickly slipped into the warm embrace of sleep, where her grief, at least briefly, could not reach her. When she woke the next day, she wondered briefly why her chest hurt so badly. It took but a moment for her to remember, and the tears were immediate. She rolled over and put her palm on Ray's side of the bed, where the mattress was cold and empty. Behind the sound of her crying, she could hear voices down the hallway. Cheryl and Teresa's mother were speaking in somber tones. Teresa looked at the clock. It was shortly after noon. Cheryl's sleeping pills had caused her to sleep for more than 11 hours. Teresa sat up in bed and wiped the tears from her cheeks, consciously pressing the sorrow down deep into her stomach. She picked up her cell phone from the nightstand, more out of habit than necessity, and shuffled toward the bathroom, flipping a switch. The light assaulted her eyes, and for a moment, she absorbed her own pitiful reflection. Eyes swollen, cheeks splotchy, nose red. She took in a long, shaking breath. Then her phone buzzed in her hand, and she jumped. The screen said, "Ray." Teresa stared at it, a mixture of disbelief and confusion, coursing through her brain. She answered it. "Hello?" Her voice was barely a croak. "Why did the man always get hit by a bike on his way to work?" Ray said. Teresa struggled to take a breath, and when she was finally able, it came in a rattling gasp. She took an involuntary step away from the mirror, as if retreating from what she was hearing. Her mind raced as she felt a sudden surge of hope warring against her lingering sorrow, and she wondered if perhaps the events of yesterday had been nothing but an incredible dream. Because he was stuck in a vicious cycle, Ray concluded. "Ray?" Teresa said. "Yeah, baby," he responded. "What's wrong? The joke wasn't that bad." "Ray, where are you?" she asked. "I'm at work," he said with a slight chuckle. "Just got out of a meeting. My presentation went well. I'm supposed to present it again to senior staff on Wednesday. Things are looking promising." Teresa didn't respond. "Reese, are you okay?" he asked. Teresa looked at herself in the mirror, at her Halloween mask of grief. The floor felt like it was tilting under her, and her brain, still kicking off the last remnants of Cheryl's pills, was a swamp of conflicting thoughts. "Reese," he said again. "What day is this?" she asked. "What? It's Monday," he said. "What's going on? What's wrong?" "It's Tuesday," she said. "No, it's—" Ray began, but then he stopped. There was silence on both ends of the phone for a moment. Then Ray said, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" she asked. Then she heard it, and a sick feeling of déjà vu swept through her. There was a loud report, a distant bang, coming over the phone. "What was that?" Ray said, and from the sound of his voice he was walking. "Ray, wait," Teresa said. There was another loud report, still distant but closer, and Teresa heard a woman scream. "I'm going to find out what's going on," Ray said. "I'll call you back." "Don't," Teresa said, but he was gone. Teresa put her phone down on the bathroom sink and stared down at it, her hair cascading in front of her eyes. She shook her head violently. trying to shake off the confusion that made it difficult for her to focus. She ran her fingers through her hair and then pulled at it in frustration. She picked her phone back up and called Ray's cell. Voicemail. She called his desk phone. Voicemail. She called reception at his office. The outgoing message informed her that in light of yesterday's tragic events, the office would be closed for the remainder of the week. Teresa furrowed her brow and put the phone down on the sink again. Seconds later, it rang again. The screen said, "Ray." She answered it without saying anything. "Reese?" Ray said, his voice whispering panic. "Listen to me. There's a man with a gun." Teresa began to sob, and her hand shook so violently that she could barely hold the phone to her ear. "I'm in the bathroom down the hall from my office. Baby, he killed Mark. I saw it happen." Ray's voice trembled, on the verge of tears. Teresa said nothing. "I called the police," Ray continued. "They're on their way." He took a long, trembling breath. Teresa sat down on the floor and brought her knees up to her chest. She began to rock back and forth. "I don't know where he is now," Ray said. "I saw him at the end of the hallway. I saw him shoot Mark. I came in here because it was the closest door. I don't know if he saw me, but the door doesn't lock. I'm in one of the stalls." There was a long moment of silence. "Reese, talk to me," Ray demanded desperately. "Ray," she said through her sobs. She could manage no more words than that. "I don't know who this guy is," Ray said. "He's wearing a mask. A ski mask. I think he's—" But Ray stopped talking suddenly at the sound of a loud bang, disturbingly close. He hesitated and took a long, shaking breath. "I love you, Reese," he whispered. Over the phone, Teresa heard the sound of a door being kicked open and hitting a wall. Ray gasped. Teresa relived the sound of the bathroom stall door being kicked open, the sound of Ray's desperate objection, and then the final sound of the gun being fired. And then, in the ensuing silence, Teresa relived the grief of her husband's death for the second time. She told no one about the call, not Cheryl, and not her mother. She couldn't explain it to herself, much less to anyone else. The two had continued to keep her company throughout the day, answering phone calls, dealing with concerned well-wishers, attempting to get Teresa to eat, and managing the details of Ray's viewing and funeral, which were scheduled for Saturday evening and Sunday morning respectively. But mostly the two of them were there simply to make sure that Teresa was not alone. In her waking moments, they treated her like an antique porcelain doll, delicate and fragile. Teresa slept for most of the day, even without Cheryl's chemical help. She ate hardly at all, a fact that distressed her mother. She had still been in bed at noon on the following day, Wednesday, 2 days after Ray's death, when her cell phone rang. The screen said, "Ray." Her body went numb and she quietly began to cry. She answered it. "Ray?" she said quietly. "Why did the man always get hit by a bike on his way to work?" he said. Teresa ended the call immediately, and then shut her phone off completely and tossed it aside. She lay in bed and wept. On the third day, Thursday, Teresa was alone in the house. Cheryl and her mother had other things to attend to and hadn't been outside the house since Monday evening. Teresa had showered, brushed her hair, and even put on a bit of makeup. Her arm felt weak and heavy as she did so, but she attempted a tired smile as she insisted that she would be fine if her mom and best friend left her alone for a little while. When her cell phone rang shortly after noon, she was sitting at the kitchen table, the bright sunlight through the windows making her head ache after so much time spent in the darkness of her bedroom. She answered it, her voice weak. Because he was stuck in a vicious cycle. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, Teresa wondered if Ray was really there. Finally, he laughed and asked, "How did you do that?" "I'm not sure," she said. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You sound strange." Teresa took a deep breath. "Do you know who Vincent Holland is?" she asked. "Yeah, he works down in engineering, I think. I don't know him real well. I do know that every day at lunch he eats an onion like an apple. Never seen anything like it." "Ray, he has a gun," Teresa said. "What? How do you know that?" "Don't ask me that right now," she responded. "He has a gun and he's going to start shooting people. You have to get out." "Reese, I don't." But then Ray stopped as they both heard the sound of a gun being fired. What was that? Listen to me, Teresa said. You have to get out of the building. Ray was silent for a moment. Then he said, Okay, I'm going. And then the phone fell silent. Teresa put the phone on the table and stared at it. Dust floated silently through a sunbeam that cascaded through the window and landed with warmth on the back of her hand. She wondered how the sun continued to shine, as if the entire world wasn't enveloped in grief like she was. Her phone rang again. Ray. She answered. Baby? I saw him, Ray whispered. Where are you? She asked. I'm in the bathroom down the hall from my office. Baby, he killed Mark. Teresa ended the call and slammed her phone back down on the table. She put her hands over her eyes and cried. Friday, shortly after noon, Teresa sat at the kitchen table with Cheryl and her mother. The three of them were quietly nursing cups of tea, the kitchen counters, and nearly every other available surface covered in gift baskets and flowers. Teresa's mother and Cheryl made quiet small talk as Teresa sat silently, her eyes intently focused on her cell phone, which sat like a dumb blank slate on the table in front of her. 12:03 came and went without a call. Teresa chuckled mirthlessly to herself. She had intentionally made sure she was not alone for today's phone call from Ray. If he did call again, this time she wanted witnesses, but part of her knew that he would not call her if she was not alone. Is everything okay, Reese? Cheryl asked. Teresa peeled her eyes away from the silent phone. Yes, she whispered, and sipped her tea. I flew in from across country for Ray's viewing and funeral. Teresa's mother and I were cordial toward each other, but also avoided each other as much as possible for Teresa's sake. I was shocked at how she looked, tired and haggard and grief-stricken, of course, but also troubled in a way that did not look like simple mourning. I held her tightly several times over the course of those 2 days, always at a loss for words, wishing there was anything in the world I could do to remove the weight of sorrow pressing on her shoulders. Teresa told me later that she had tucked her phone away during those 2 days of activities. She had thought that maybe going through the ceremony of remembering Ray's life, seeing his serene face as he lay dead in his casket, and then watching with surprising detachment as his body was lowered into the ground, would bring a final end to his daily calls. But on Monday, alone at home for only the second time in the week since Ray had died, her phone rang again. She considered not answering it, but could not resist doing so, a sense of both longing and hopelessness in her chest. Ray, she said. Why did the man always get hit by a bike on his way to work? Ray said, and Teresa burst into tears. For the next several days, Teresa lived in a fog. She always took Ray's call. Some days, she let the conversation play out like it had on the first day, relishing those first fleeting seconds when Ray was still happy and alive. Other days, she interrupted his joke in order to ask him a question, like where he had put the key to the safety deposit box, or where he had filed insurance papers. Confused but cooperative, Ray always answered her questions. Some days she had used those initial seconds to convey her deep love for him, and she had sobbed as he had expressed his love for her in return. But then, all too quickly, the sound of a gun would bring their conversation to an abrupt end. And then one day, weeks on, the phone had rung, and Teresa had said, "Hello, baby," and waited for Ray to launch into his bicycle joke. There was a pause, and Ray had said, "Reese, did I call you earlier today?" A coldness spread through Teresa's chest that she couldn't understand. "What? No, you didn't." "It's so strange," Ray said. "I picked up the phone to call you and got this sudden sense of déjà vu, like I already called you today." A tear fell silently down Teresa's cheek. She couldn't find words. "Is everything okay?" Ray asked. "I miss you, baby," she whispered. Ray chuckled. "I miss you too?" he responded, more of a question than a statement. "I'll see you in a few hours." "No, you won't," she said. "Reese, what?" And then he stopped. "Did you hear that?" Teresa hung up the phone. Her thoughts stirred with confusion and an odd sense of hope. Every prior conversation had been laden with a heavy sense of the inevitable. No matter what Teresa said to him, Ray would always end up dead on the floor of his office bathroom. But today he had seemed to remember something, and their conversation had taken a different course at Ray's direction. And Teresa began to wonder what would happen if she tried pushing harder, made more of an effort to get Ray to take a different course of action. The next day when Ray called, Teresa immediately took charge of the conversation. "Ray, I need you to listen to me carefully and answer me as fast as you can. How many different ways are there out of your office? Out of your department, I mean." "What?" he said. "Answer me," she insisted. "There's the main door. Straight through goes to the IT department, and to the left takes me down the main hallway. There's a second door that goes through HR, but that just meets up with the main hallway at the other end. And then there's the door to the balcony. Why are you asking me this?" "Grab your keys. Don't grab anything else," Teresa insisted. "Go through the IT department. Do not go down the hall. Get to your car and come home. Now." There was a pause, and then Ray said, Okay, I'm coming." And the line went dead. Teresa found herself out of breath while she waited. She paced. Moments later, her phone rang again. "Reese, listen to me. There's a man with a gun." Teresa screamed in frustration and threw her phone across the room, where it hit the carpet and slid across the floor. The next time he called, Teresa asked, "Ray, the balcony outside your department, does it have steps that go down to the courtyard?" "Yes," he said. "Why do you ask? And you can get to the parking lot from there?" "Yes. What's going on?" "Go," Teresa insisted. "Don't ask me anything. Just go out the balcony doors into your car. Do it now. Come home." "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Go," she yelled and hung up the phone. A minute passed, then 2. Teresa barely breathed as she stared at her phone. 5 minutes passed without a call from Ray. She was finally able to take a breath. Teresa was on her bed. Her back ached as she sat arched over her phone. For the first time since the day he died, there was no second phone call, and Teresa had no idea what to expect next. She was lost in a nearly thoughtless daze when she heard the front door open. She jumped and nearly cried out. The door closed and she heard footsteps. She jumped from the bed, racing from the bedroom and down the hallway to the foyer. And impossibly, there he was, his tall, gangly, goofy-looking yet handsome self, although his skin was deathly pale to the point of almost being blue. He smiled at her, although his brow was furrowed in concern. His mouth formed the beginnings of a question, but she ran to him and leapt into his arms. He was cold, deathly cold, and Teresa gasped. "Is everything okay?" he asked, and his voice sounded like it did on mornings when he had first woken up, rattling and unused. "Everything is okay now," Teresa said, weeping into his shoulder, holding him tighter than she ever had before. And in return, Ray held her tightly as well, but his hands were like ice on her back, his body stiff against hers, and although her ear was pressed firmly against his chest, she could not feel his heart beating, a fact that she dismissed just as quickly as she realized it. Teresa decided to tell him everything. Sitting at the kitchen table, she held his icy hand in both of hers as she recounted everything from the initial shooting at Ray's office, his death, his funeral, and his daily phone calls. He stared at her blankly, his face registering no alarm, confusion, or even recollection as she spoke. She sat back in her chair and considered him for a moment. Tabula rasa, she thought dully as she looked at him. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't thirsty. He was content to sit quietly until Teresa gave him directions to move. Her heart ached with the dueling emotions of relief and terrible confusion, and she watched him closely, unable to hide the bewilderment on her face, and yet Ray never asked her what was wrong. That evening, Teresa led Ray to their bedroom, where he stood dully by the foot of the bed and looked at her as if he had never been in the room before. She undressed him, and as she did so, she realized he was wearing his work clothes, not the suit he had been buried in, the suit he had worn on their wedding day. She pulled back the covers and told him to lie down. He did so with silent obedience. She slid in beside him and kissed him. His kiss was both familiar and foreign to her. His lips were soft and passive, where they had always been firm and insistent before, and there was no warmth there. But the texture and the taste of him was the same, and Teresa nearly wept as they embraced again. They made love, Teresa initiating and leading where Ray had always taken charge before, and while her heart overflowed with the joy of being held by her husband once more, her body shivered at the iciness of his touch. When Teresa awoke the next morning, sunlight touching her eyelids, she reached out without opening her eyes, but her fingers encountered nothing. Ray's side of the bed was empty, the covers pulled up as if he had never been there. She sat up abruptly. "Ray?" she called out. There was no answer. She searched the house, calling out for him several times, but he was gone. She returned to the bedroom, feeling both confused and sorrowful. Where had he gone, and would he come back? And then, shortly after noon, her phone rang. The screen said, "Ray." She answered it. "Ray?" "Reese," he said, his voice sounding even more raspy and unused than before. "Don't worry. I know there's a shooter. I'm coming home." The line went dead and Teresa set her phone down. Her chest knotted in a cacophony of emotions, sorrow, hope, frustration, and even fear, that she realized she could hardly feel anything anymore. But come home he did, and this became their new pattern, the new vicious cycle they were stuck in. Every day he would come home, every day looking even more pale and feeling even more cold to the touch, his personality receding even further into the empty shell that he was becoming, a vacancy behind the eyes that had once been so passionate and full of life. Teresa had to tell him to sit, to eat, to bathe himself. He was like an elderly man who was losing use of his faculties, and Teresa evolved into his loving but confused and somewhat terrified caretaker. And every morning, Ray's side of the bed would be empty again, and he would call Teresa from work shortly after noon to tell her that he was coming home. Teresa noticed that each time, his voice sounded more like it was being dragged over stones, like his vocal cords are decaying, she thought. It was not long before his countenance began to catch up with his voice. He began to look more physically withered, his tall frame beginning to bend, his eyes large in their sockets as his face became even more wan, and his cheeks more sunken. Teresa allowed this cycle to continue for months, her love for her husband locking her in a living hell. But she was rapidly reaching the point of collapse herself, her emotional and mental well-being withering right along with Ray's countenance. "I'm coming home," he had said to her over the phone, his voice like dusty rocks being rubbed together, barely recognizable to her. "Wait," she had said. "Ray, don't come home. Stay there. It's okay. Stay there." "No," he responded, slowly and without emotion. "No, if I stay here, I'll die. I'm coming home." Teresa had hung up the phone, wept, and waited once more for her husband to return. She wept because her husband was dead. She wept because he was alive, and yet dying more every day before her very eyes. She wept because she felt bound to him in whatever repeating loop that his death and their love had created. And she wept because they were together again, and yet she felt entirely alone. Finally, on the day that Teresa took her own life, she made a decision that came to her easily and without fear. In fact, the idea gave her the first comfort she had felt in the year since Ray had died. Perhaps the key to escaping this living hell was to die herself. More precisely, to die beside Ray as they slept together in bed, and in the morning when he was gone, perhaps she could be gone too. Gone, but together. She called me that afternoon to tell me her story, to tell me her plan, and to tell me goodbye. I listened with terrified disbelief as she recounted the details of her miserable life in the months since Ray had died. Her story was one I could not accept as fact, and yet simultaneously I knew from the sound of her tired yet determined voice that my daughter was telling me the absolute truth. "Is Ray there now?" I asked her. "Yes," she said tiredly. "Do you want to talk to him?" I didn't answer, but then I heard Teresa say distantly, "It's Dad. Talk to him." There was a shuffling sound, followed by raspy breathing. "Ray?" I said, and I was surprised to find my own voice was trembling. He didn't respond, but I could hear as he attempted to. All I heard was the sound of his laborious breath and the vaguely recognizable tones of his voice as he attempted to speak. But his words were garbled, his voice wasted. Teresa took the phone back. "I have to go now, Daddy." "Baby, don't do this," I said, crying but trying to hold myself together. "I love you. Your mother loves you. Let us help you. There has to be some other way." Teresa began to cry. "There is no other way, Daddy. This is the only way." "No," I insisted. You still have so much to live for. Let me take you away from there. You can come here. Maybe Ray won't come to you anymore if you're not there. I felt myself playing along with her, even though I wasn't sure I even fully believed her. Daddy, there's something else, she said, taking a long and exhausted breath. I'm pregnant. I started, then stopped. A hard lump rose in my throat. I couldn't breathe. My mind pieced it together. Teresa was pregnant, and Ray had been dead for more than a year. It's Ray's, she said, answering the question I hadn't asked. But she didn't finish the statement. I don't know what it is. I just know I can't, Daddy. I just can't. She wept. She said her final goodbyes to me, ignoring my pleading. And then the call was over. I already told you how the police found her. The autopsy revealed that she had died consuming a large number of sleeping pills left helpfully behind by her best friend Cheryl. The autopsy also revealed that she had been several months pregnant. I insisted that this detail never be revealed to her mother. Estranged and distant though we are, there are some horrors a mother should be spared when it comes to her own child. So this, as I said, is Teresa's story, and the story of her husband Ray. And you may not believe me, but it's an absolutely true story, as fantastical as that might sound. I believe Teresa now, although 2 weeks ago when she told me her story for the first time, of course I had doubted her. I don't doubt her anymore, not a single detail. Because every day, she calls to tell me all over again. Mysteries are everywhere, and some may be closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mystery. See you in the next story.